Okay, testing. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome you to the annual International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day on behalf of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in Saddleback Church. We're glad that you're here joining us today and online. If you haven't had a chance to get a votive, they are outside, and if you do have them here, feel free, if you would like, to turn them on in memory of your loved one. My name is David Mandani, and I'm the pastor of mental health here at Saddleback Church. Survivor Day is a day when suicide loss survivors can gather together to find comfort and gain understanding as they share their stories of healing and hope. International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day was created by an act of Congress in 1999, and since then has been sponsored and supported by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And it takes place every year, every Saturday before American Thanksgiving. Our vision today is to create a safe space where people can gather to heal together, free of shame and stigma. If you are newly bereaved, you are invited to join us after the butterfly ceremony to connect with Kaye Warren for some Q&A time and to get some support here back in the auditorium at 11 a.m. I would like to thank everyone who has contributed their time and effort to organizing this event, our volunteers, our exhibitors, our staff, our vendors, and presenters who are committed to our vision today. As our guests, feel free to reach out to any staff member or volunteer for the location of the restrooms. And if you haven't yet had a chance to go check out our exhibitors, they're just outside the doors to the left in the Half Gym auditorium. There is a lot of great books and materials that you can walk away with that can help you as you journey in grief. Like you, I'm a survivor of suicide loss. My cousin died by suicide over a year ago, and I lost another cousin 5 years ago. My family has learned that we don't have to do it alone, that everyone copes with grief in his or her own way. I've learned that even though it might seem impossible to you right now, we have the capacity to heal. Because healing is not about moving on or getting over it. It's about learning to make peace with our pain and finding the God-given purpose in our lives again. So I honor and I commend you for being here today and watching online. I know that just getting yourself here this morning was very difficult for many of you, especially those who have experienced the loss of a loved one very recently. So I admire you, I honor you. I thank you for your courage to be here. And it is my belief that your presence alone here today, in and of itself, is healing. So please, settle comfortably into your seats and online. Take a deep breath with me and exhale slowly, letting your jaw relax, letting your shoulders relax. Now take another slow, deep breath and let your heart be open to what is appropriate for you today.
Well, good morning. My name is Jim Taylor. I'm with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And first, I would like to thank Saddleback Church for hosting this. Kaye, thank you so much. Your efforts towards suicide prevention, all of your efforts towards suicide prevention and mental health is making a difference. It is making a difference. You're doing fantastic work, and we cherish our relationship, so thank you very much. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention Orange County chapter, that's us. We're an all-volunteer organization. Clearly, our mission is to help reduce suicide, specifically in Orange County. That's our charter. We do that through advocacy, education, and outreach. By advocacy, we help legislators at the local, state, and federal level to try and write bills that deal with mental health, that deal with suicide prevention, and to deal with bullying. Once a year, all of the chapters in California gather en masse in Sacramento. We descend upon the Capitol building like locusts, and we lobby. We lobby the state legislature to try and get those bills through, get them written. We assist, we consult, we push, we bother, we irritate, and we've had success. At the federal level, once a year, all the chapters in the United States send volunteers, and we descend upon Congress, and we do exactly the same thing. And we've got results. In California, there's legislation that was signed a couple of years ago by Governor Brown to mandate that all health professionals in California have a certain level of suicide prevention training before they can be licensed. That was signed into law. That was something we pushed for. More recently, middle schools and high schools have to have a multi-tiered suicide prevention plan in place. And a lot of times, a lot of the school districts used our template for their suicide prevention plan. That was done with the assist of volunteers. At the federal level, it's still in the works, but we're working on a 3-digit implementation similar to 911, but for suicide prevention. And that, again, it's all done by volunteers who are taking their own time to fly to Sacramento, to fly to Washington, and to work with the representatives. By education, we do seminars and training. How do you spot somebody who's showing the signs? How can you tell if somebody is sad, or maybe they're more than sad? And once you identify that, what do you do? How do you talk to them? How do you get them to go seek the help that they need without pushing them away? So we do a lot of that. We do seminars for professionals. We do seminars for teachers, educational professionals, and anybody else who wants it. The outreach. One of the big things is suicide has a stigma. It's getting better, but it still has a stigma. People don't want to talk about it. It's a taboo subject. We talk about it all the time. We take it out of the darkness, we shine a light on it, we remove that stigma, and then people will go freely and talk about that they're having these thoughts. They're feeling these feelings, and they want to get help. So we try to find a way to get people to talk about it, remove the stigma, get suicide out of the darkness, into the light, and then we can start coming up with real solutions. And again, that's all volunteers. If you ever want to get involved, stop one of us wearing these shirts and we'll tell you we can take all of you. There's so much work to be done. Orange County officially has 1 suicide per day. Personally, I think the number is much higher because there are clerical things going on in Orange County where they get misclassified. Is that a problem? Yes, it's a problem when they get misclassified, because when we go talk to the powers that be, they look at the numbers and go, it's not that bad. Actually, how about you multiply that number by 4? It's bad. We need to do something. We need to get the mental health system back on track. We need to get our government back focused on mental health solutions, and that's going to clear up a lot of problems. We got a lot of work to do, but we're doing it, and we are making changes. Our organization, Saddleback Church, we're making a big difference. So thank you all. Every year, AFSP comes out with a new movie. I think with the exception of one year, the movie was so good we had to bring it back for a second year. But these movies are inspirational, they're meant to be educational, and they're meant to present solutions. This year's movie, and bear in mind that these Survivor Days are going on all across the country. I believe there's about 87 of them going on today, and trying to coordinate everybody today is going to see this movie for the first time. The movie's called Pathways to Healing. Now, this film is unique from our previous documentaries in that it follows several individuals who all experienced the loss of the same loved one. In this film, we see how different people close to him navigated their loss over the past 6 years in their own individual ways, but also together. The film depicts many of the similarities shared among the different people in their response to their loved one's death, as well as how contrasting strategies for coping impacted the various people following their loss. May I present Pathways to Healing.
My son, Chris, was the most handsome, intelligent young man.
Soft-spoken, but funny.
Funny, sarcastic.
Yeah,
He cared about, like, secretly nice.
An amazing brother and friend to me. He had a really big heart.
Hell of a teammate, hell of a friend. You know, I just think of him next to me and like helping me through it. Out there enjoying the sun, trails.
He was my brother, and it was really hard to lose that.
My name's Brenda Taddeo. I lost a son, my youngest son, to suicide almost 6 years ago.
For me, my friendship, like we were inseparable for, 22 years of our lives, playing outside every single day in the summer. We were at the same schools. We were almost twins, I felt.
I was the bossy older sister, so, I said, we're gonna be friends too. I'm gonna make you do everything with me. I would call him and say, hey, I wanna do this and I'm not going by myself, so. And he would say, okay, that's fine, I guess.
Chris was pretty introverted and quiet. And sometimes that bothered him. That was something that bothered him. He didn't feel as social as he would like to be.
And I told him when he got into 7th grade, you gotta find some kind of team or sport or something to do, like after school. And he chose running.
When Chris started running, he was sort of a middle-of-the-road runner. And then he went to a couple summer camps throughout high school, and we noticed by his senior year, he had really just taken off.
He was friends with people on his running teams. And, after college, they all sort of trickled away and moved out of town, moved out of state. So he didn't really have anybody anymore.
Chris, I think, struggled a lot with his transition once he graduated from college. He had these expectations of himself. There was just something in him that he became more and more discouraged. The first question that I had, and I said out loud to my dad, why? And he said, I don't know. Especially I had just talked to him, and I felt like, I just talked to him. How could this have happened?
That day of his death runs through my head every day, too. And I have to try to set it aside and put it out of my mind. But we miss him so much. I just miss him and think about him every day.
Sometimes, some people, the first year can be tough because you're just, to some degree, you're in shock. I think that second year, you start to realize he's not back. He's not going to be back.
I felt like that can't be right. I can't, I went through like a period of denial that night where it's like, no, like they've got it wrong. They're confused. There's still a chance. And, like that week after, I went back to work the next week and I just dove back into work a little bit. And I think I put off some of the, serious confronting of what happened.
It sort of felt like, well, he's away at school, he's away at college, and, he'll be coming back someday. Well, eventually I learned that he's never coming back.
All of these questions kind of, like, how sad was he? Had he been sad his whole life, or just after a transition back home after college? I felt like there was like a never-ending stream of all these questions that we were left with. For whatever reason, he was scared to tell somebody, to tell us, to tell even a doctor that he felt like that.
We didn't understand depression, that how can depression be that severe? But it can be debilitating.
I mean, I think there's always a period of time where you feel guilty, you know, that I didn't do something. I could have done something.
You can't go there all the time. You know, you just can't. You know, if you learn more about mental health, that you can be better prepared. So I can maybe help somebody else.
I loved him with everything I had, and that was all I could do for him.
I think the hardest part about the marriage after the death of a child is no two people grieve the same way. You know, you might be in a stage where you cry a lot and the other person is not. So if you understand that, then you can help get through it.
The days after, I kept on closing the bedroom door. And I think my husband wanted the door open to see his room. But then I realized this is where we raised our kids, you know, and played in the backyard and played with each other and their toys. All, you know, that house was their home. And I thought to myself, I have a lot more good memories being in that home than the one traumatic, devastating, bad memory. So I started coming to church just a few months after he died. You know, I saw a new light and a new hope. I joined a Compassionate Friends group, and this is for parents that have lost children.
I know Brenda will internalize more than I do. Sometimes you say things at the meetings, you open up, and I find, oh, that's it. She's feeling this. It's okay to have those feelings. They're natural feelings. There's nothing wrong with them.
My first time I walked in, I was just amazed that there was so many other parents that had felt like me and had gone through losing a child. You know, it was just so hard to believe, but they knew how I felt.
We were fortunate that we had support. You know, we had family, we had friends. Those kind of things impacted our lives.
It's always going to hurt. It's always going to, you know, be a part of me that's not there. But I think over time, you know, you learn to rely on other people a little bit better.
I had really great friends who were willing to talk to me when I needed to talk. They were willing to listen. They weren't scared to talk about Chris. They weren't scared to say his name. They weren't scared to say, I went for a run today and I thought about Chris the whole time. We would have wanted Chris to seek mental health treatment, to see a doctor. So how could we not do that for ourselves? My therapist let me talk freely about Chris, about what was bothering me. And I said, there are sometimes I will see something in Wegmans and I just want to cry. And he said, you know what? Why don't you? But it seemed like there would always be some sign from him to keep going or to get back up the next morning and do it all again.
At the time that Chris died, I weighed as much as I ever did. One of the local road races that they have a 5K and a 10K, so they decided to name the 5K after Chris. And so when that happened, I said, you know, I'd really like to do that race.
The first 5K race was dedicated to Chris Daniel. I just couldn't believe the overwhelming numbers. People that loved him and looked up to him and considered him a friend.
I can see, I think, more now how much you can touch somebody's life just because people have touched my life by helping me.
I'm not afraid to talk to people about their feelings. Like if I see somebody who I think is struggling, I go up to them and I ask point blank, like, are you okay? You know, like I care about you. If something's going on, like let's talk about it.
But reading and understanding myself and finding how other people got through it helped me get through it.
I just wish overall that we were all more open talking about mental health in general and loss too.
I think I just notice how people are more, like if someone is struggling, I'm just a little more like in tune to like how he's feeling now because of Chris.
Having like a network of people who all like knew him and just kind of be there for each other has been super helpful.
You can give meaning to your life, meaning to your child's life. If I'm helping other people, that makes me feel better.
I remember feeling hopeful doing his first race. I'm at that place now where I just want to create this culture where it's okay to say I'm struggling, and I am very hopeful that more people are going to be helped, just everybody together. It just makes my heart feel full and happy. It's just amazing.
Hi, I'm Kaye Warren, co-founder of Saddleback Church and also a suicide loss survivor. And through the years, we've had to develop a survival kit that helped us get through the loss of our son. And part of my survival kit has been building some very deep relationships, having a few friends who could walk this road with us, very much the way that the Taddeo family talked about in the video. People who would listen to us, who would cry with us, who would be there for us. Remember Matthew, show up for us in some practical ways, and to keep hope alive. In grief, it's really normal to isolate and to keep your thoughts to yourself or to withdraw from other people with the feeling that maybe other people don't understand and they wouldn't know what it's like. And yet, to survive and to do well, again, is going to require really that you reach out and that you let other people in to your grief to help you walk through it. I think that many of us have discovered along the way that we all follow our own path, and that some people are ready fairly quickly to reach out and let other people in, and other people, I've watched some of these AFSP videos before, and there was a dad in one of these who talked about that for 10 years he was angry and he didn't want to talk about it. But after 10 years, that anger, which was grief, softened into the softer feelings of sadness, and he was able to then talk about it and let people in. So if you are, as you are on your own journey of grief, you just need to know that some will be ready sooner than others to let other people in and to walk with you. But when you are ready to do that, there are some safe places where you can go to be with people who will listen to your story, places where people will not tell you to just get over it, to just move on, to just buck up, to think about all the good things. I mean, sometimes those are the things that people who are not in grief themselves will tell those of us who are mourners. But there are some very safe support groups in which that's not what you will find. You will find places where your grief is taken seriously. At Saddleback, I just want to tell you, we have several different support groups. We do have a survivor of suicide loss group, and Regina, two our leaders are here, and Lorraine, and I can't think of your name. My mind just Chris, I'm so sorry, Chris. Chris and Lorraine and Regina are part of our Survivor of Suicide Loss group, and they will be here afterwards if you would be interested in participating in that. Thank you so much. We also have Grief Share at Saddleback. We also have a Grieving Moms, specifically Carrie, are you in here? Carrie is in the do something, all right, there she goes. Carrie leads our Grieving Moms, and that is not just for moms of those who have died by suicide, but children, lost to any reason. And then the compassionate friends that was mentioned in the video. And that is for parents who have lost a child to any cause. But there is a subgroup for parents who have lost a child to suicide. And Dave and Barb Bauer are part of our family here at Saddleback. They have their own story of grief and loss and have found help in compassionate friends. And I'd love for Barb, for you to come and share it. Would you welcome Barb as she tells her story?
Good morning. I love talking about my son. I'm sure you can all relate. So I really appreciate your hearing my story. About 12 years ago, I spent some time looking at a website that showed pictures of children available for international adoption. And I stopped short when I saw this photo of Gage. He was such a darling boy with a shy smile and an angelic face. God placed him in my heart in that moment, and there was no turning back for me. My husband Dave and our children, Becky, Christine, and Jake, quickly jumped on board, and we began our 18-month journey toward adopting Gage. He was 11 years old when we started the process and came home from China just after his 12th birthday. You might think it would take time to fall in love with a 12-year-old boy who was in reality a complete stranger, but God gifted us with a depth of love for Gage that was as stunning as it was perfectly natural. We loved everything about him and were overwhelmed with gratitude to God for making us a family. Gage adjusted beautifully to our family and to life as an American. His sense of humor made him stand out among his friends, and he carried a great deal of compassion in his young heart. He discovered the sport of lacrosse, which became a passion throughout his high school years, as he played on both high school and club teams. Our hearts were overflowing when Gage accepted Christ and was baptized during the high school ministry summer camp. He went on peace trips to China, Rwanda, and Mexico. Gage's traumatic childhood took its toll. He was abandoned on a train in northeastern China when he was 1 year old and spent the next 11 years in rough circumstances in 2 different orphanages. Gage was diagnosed with depression during his junior year of high school and took medication for about a year. He saw a Christian therapist who specializes in orphan trauma from the time of the onset of his depression until 3 weeks before his death. There's no way to describe the utter shock we felt when the Orange County coroner called us in December of 2015 to announce that Gage had taken his life. It was a feeling of utter sickness, despair, and disbelief. During those early hours, I had the bizarre feeling that this wrong could be righted somehow, that I could turn back the clock and do something, anything to save my son. The first night, I was only able to sleep by telling myself that Gage was fine and was in his bedroom. I cried out to God in the most primitive of ways, repeating, "Have mercy on me," as I literally slid to the floor in grief. Although words failed me, I communicated with God as a small child might, with cries for help to bear the pain. I had moments where I felt I couldn't stand to be me, that I just needed to step outside of myself and be someone else. I couldn't help but wonder if this was how Gage had felt. One of the first rational thoughts I had during those first days was that I previously had no idea what suffering was. Of course, I had experienced losses, and I knew that terrible things happen throughout the world, but I was shocked to my core at how desperately wounded a person could be and still continue breathing. I would never again hear an account of another person's suffering without feeling it in my gut. God began to show me that my path to healing would be in pouring myself out to help others. I crave knowledge about how others bore suffering, so I ordered tons of books from Amazon on suffering, suicide, and loss. I learned that I had a choice to make. Would I collapse in grief and live my life in a diminished way, or would I willingly seek God and how He might use my sorrow to help others? My answer came easily and quickly, since our other 3 children and many of Gage's friends needed Dave and I to help them process their grief and deal with the immense guilt and regret that is unique to suicide death. We survived the first days by listening to, praying with, and loving other young people who desperately needed us. In the nearly 4 years since Gage's death, God has led us to groups and individuals who need to share the heart-shattering sorrow that results from the loss of a child. And we help heal by helping others heal. Our Saddleback family has embraced and lifted us up throughout this tragedy. Our small group has done everything to support us, including taking care of our dogs, making meals, wiping our tears, and helping us laugh again. A few days after Gage's death, we came to Saturday service and were surrounded by our small group who stood with us literally and figuratively. We felt the depth of Christ's love through these beloved friends who have carried us on their backs. God has reached me in new ways through this catastrophic loss. I find solace in God's creation, a seagull, the powerful rise of the mountains, a colorful cactus flower, a sunset. I have greatly simplified my life in that things that used to be important have very little meaning to me now. I'm not a saint by any means. I'm often irritable and still find myself battling pride and frustration. But I know that God is in control and has seen me through a tragedy that has to be one of the worst things that can happen to a mother. My heart is full of holes, but that means my heart has room for others who are sad, and I trust that God will lead me to those who need love. God has taught me to praise him in all things. He didn't cause Gage's death, and his heart aches with mine. Dave and I have continued to praise God through this trial, and we have the blessed hope that we will see Gage again when all things are made right in the end. When we adopted Gage, the scripture we claimed for him was Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. On the Saturday after Gage died, I woke up and recalled this scripture and in great pain asked myself if Gage truly did have hope, and I questioned his future that was cut so short. But God reminded me that Gage did find hope in the gospel and in his saving relationship with Jesus Christ. That faith gave him a future of eternal life with God in heaven, a future without bounds. So we continue to claim Jeremiah 29:11 for our precious son Gage. Thank you for allowing me to share our story with you. Our burdens are made lighter when we share them, and I pray that you will find solace today in talking with people who understand the unique and devastating loss that has brought us here today. May God bless you.
Like the stories you saw in the video, and like Dave and Barb, as I said, I too have been touched by suicide. 25 years ago, my next door neighbor and good friend left her suicide note on my porch. And I spent many hours searching for her along with her family, and only to hear later in the day that she had attempted suicide and was in critical condition in the hospital, where I went and stood at her bedside in ICU, and then she passed away later that day. I never, ever, ever will forget that beautiful friend. 8 years ago, my cousin's husband, again, a dear friend, a pastor who had helped hundreds of other people in his career, but in his own moments of shame and dismay that he had developed a drinking problem, felt that he had nowhere to go. He was a pastor who felt like there was no one who would be there to pastor him, and he took his life. But the most personal suicide, of course, was that of my son, Matthew. After nearly 20 years of battling serious mental illness and numerous hospitalizations and suicide attempts. And like the people in the film, like Barb, like you, I believe I have felt every emotion in the aftermath of suicide, from crushing, horrible, catastrophic grief, numb, speechless agony, riveting, blinding guilt and remorse, sleepless nights where my why is just a scream in the darkness, fatigue that has been so pervasive that I could barely form words with my mouth, and a good day would be to get up and brush my teeth. I have felt bitter anger of the failures among the mental health professionals who worked with us over the years, those who treated him with little to no compassion, although there were those who did treat him compassionately. There were many more that treated him like a number. There were those who didn't understand his condition and misdiagnosed him. A lot of anger. I was angry and have been angry that God didn't stop him. Moments of anger at Matthew that he left us. I've experienced the loss of pleasure in food, friends, sex, hobbies. I've experienced the world becoming monochromatic and losing its color. I've experienced the aching to just hold him in my arms one more time. My ears, if I close my eyes, my ears can still hear the sound of him walking in our house and the sound of his keys being dropped on our fireplace hearth. I can hear that sound of him just announcing, I'm here. I've experienced the almost wordless ability to live with the fact that I know I will live every day of the rest of this life without him. I'm a very visual person, and tangible things have helped me in my grieving and my mourning. And I brought two of them with me. I talk about them a lot because sometimes we need tangible ways to be able to express things that we don't know how to put into words. And so for me, these two things in particular have been so helpful. A few years before Matthew died, as his serious mental illness just began spiraling, and we didn't know what else to do. And we had done everything we knew to do. And so I began to write down verses. I'm a Christian, and so there were verses in the Bible that comforted me, and I wanted to pray them, but sometimes in the middle of the night I couldn't even think where these verses were, and so I began to write them out on cards, and I put them in this box that's labeled hope. I found this box in a gift store, and a friend bought it for me, and I began to fill this box with verses that gave me comfort and lyrics to songs that gave me hope, that Matthew was going to be okay and that he was going to be, if not healed, which is what I wanted. I just wanted him to be what his greatest heart's dream was, just to be normal like everybody else. And if that wasn't going to happen exactly that way, I had hope that we would eventually learn how to help him manage his illness so that he could have a more relatively normal life. And as a Christian, this hope box became something that I went to every day and pulled out verses and these lyrics of songs. And then Matthew died. And this box that said hope felt like it mocked me. I mean, how could I come home and look at this box filled with Bible verses that felt like weren't true and that hadn't happened, and really struggled deeply with God and with faith and with what had happened, and how could I go on? And I took those verses out of that box, not because they weren't true, but they didn't end up being true for him. And so there was just this numb, empty place of wrestling with God, and those questions like the Taddeo family mentioned, like Barb mentioned, the questions, the whys, the guilt of, could I have done something different? What if I had done something different? What if we had chosen this treatment over that treatment? What did he feel like on the day that he took his life? We were with him that day. What did he feel in those moments when he took his life? Did he think of us? All those questions that many of you can relate to, they're torturous questions. They're things that become a litany in your head that you can go over and over and literally drive yourself mad with some of the questions. And most people aren't comfortable with our questions. Most people don't really know what to do with those kind of questions. But I had to do something with them. And I began to write them out and put them in what I called my mystery pot. I didn't bring my questions because they're so precious. I didn't want to lose them on the way. I didn't want anything to happen. They're dear because they represent the reality of what it's like to lose someone to suicide. And so I started writing them out on little strips of paper, and I put them in my mystery pot because you know what? I know that nobody here on earth can answer all my questions. Nobody. And I'm not going to even try to answer yours because some of them are going to remain mysteries. I even quibble with the coroner over the time of death. I'll know someday, but I don't know right now. It's a mystery to me. It's a mystery, and it bothers me. And so I've put those things in here because what I do believe, what I came to believe, was that even though there was much about Matthew's death that I could not explain, could not understand, even though he had lived with suicidal thoughts. It was not a complete surprise to us, but it was a surprise that he died that day. It wasn't supposed to be that day, because that day he had talked about hope. Because that day he had talked about he had a date in 2 days. He was going to work on his biceps with his trainer. He had bought new towels. He was going to get an upgrade on his phone. That day wasn't supposed to be the day, but it was the day. And so all the things that I can't answer, but were driving me nuts, I put in this, and I began to repopulate my hope box, because you can't live without hope. You truly can't. If you don't have hope, it's very difficult to live, because life is hard. Life is challenging for all of us. And if you don't have hope, and our loved ones, at some point, that hope was gone for them. And I didn't want to be in that place. And so I had to repopulate my hope box, and I went back to my faith, because at the end of the day, I do believe God is good, and I do believe God can be trusted. And one of the deepest parts that has gotten me through the loss of my son and rebuilding my life is coming back to the thing that there's so much I can't answer. There's so much I don't understand. But I do believe in the goodness of God. And I don't believe for a moment that God abandoned Matthew. Not for a moment did God abandon Matthew. I don't understand it all. But I am absolutely confident that my hope is in God. And so I've rebuilt my hope box. And there are verses in here now. Verses that give me hope, verses that I cling to. Like Psalm 126:5. Those who plant in tears will harvest with shouts of joy. I can believe that, because I have certainly planted in tears. I do believe that life comes again, and that life is good again. And it is a slow process. So not only have I felt all of those terrible things, all those moments of when I thought I cannot survive the loss. I cannot survive this loss. I have felt held in God's arms. And I would rather fight God within the comfort of his arms than to walk away. That's been my decision. Intimacy has come. I wrestle, but I wrestle with God in the safety of his love. It is barely survivable with faith. I'm not quite sure how I could do it if I didn't have faith. And hope is growing again. Every time I tell our story, every time I talk about Matthew, it's amazing to me that a story of someone, it's not a happy ending story. My son died. How can that possibly bring hope to anybody? But sometimes as I've become a mental health advocate and suicide prevention loss advocate, as I tell our story, there are people who will come up to me and say, you know what? I have been struggling so hard with suicidal thoughts, but I've seen how it has affected you, how it's affected your families you've talked about. I just want you to know I've taken suicide off the table. I don't know how I'm going to deal with my struggles, but I'm taking suicide off the table. And there are people whose lives are saved. It's a mystery. I don't quite get it all. I just know that as we tell our story, as we tell and share both the pain and the hope that life can be good again, it does bring comfort to people. And so every time to say that, every time to tell that, it makes Matthew's death a little bit less of a waste, because he was an amazing man. He was compassionate. He was kind. He cared very deeply about other people who hurt. The stories that have come back to me since he died of people saying, I knew Matthew. And Matthew, even though he had a hard time accessing hope for himself, he gave me so much hope. He told me to hold on. He told me to stay. And he encouraged me. I don't get it, but I know it's true. And every time those stories are told, I know that Matthew's life is not a waste. I read a quote soon after Matthew died. Has encouraged me. It says, sometimes life and circumstances can make our lives feel like they are ruined. But God is not helpless in the ruins. And I believe that. And I believe that for you. You may feel today that your life has been ruined by the loss of someone so dear, so precious, someone that you have loved with your whole heart. Maybe it was an acquaintance, maybe it was a relative, maybe a child, a parent, a spouse, a friend, a sibling, a grandchild, a niece, a nephew, a cousin, a dear friend, a colleague, a neighbor. We've all lost someone dear to us. And it would be very easy to conclude that our lives in many ways have been ruined by the depth of that loss. And I and Barb and Dave, many of others would tell you, life may never be exactly the same after this loss, but life will be good again. Shortly after Matthew died, a woman who had lost 2 children told me that at first grief was a crushing boulder. She said it was just a boulder that flattened me to the ground. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, I could barely even have a thought in my head. And she said over these years, that grief, the intensity of that grief has dialed down. It has not gone away, but it has dialed down. The sharp edges of 1,000 knives stabbing me at 24/7 has gone down. And she said that grief that started as a crushing boulder has become a rock that I can hold in my hand. She said it doesn't go away, and whenever I need to feel connected to my child, I can slip my hand in my pocket, and there is that grief. It's still there, but it's manageable. And I would tell especially those of you that might be newly bereaved, that load of grief can feel like it has flattened you. But I really want to encourage you to know that there is life after suicide. There is hope after suicide. And over time, especially with good support, with good caring people around you, with intentionality to seek healing in yourself, that boulder can become a rock that you hold in your hand, never going away, never forgetting the person that you loved and the person who loved you, but be able to hold it in a way that it becomes manageable. I'd like to pray for you as we end this part of the program. We're going to dismiss from here and go out. There's a beautiful butterfly release to signify both our hopes and our dreams, and very much in the same way that our loved ones felt like their lives were over. There is new life, and we want to celebrate that and honor our loved ones together. And then after that, just to remind you, just a brief time, if you're newly bereaved and would like to just have a little bit more connection, ask questions, we'll come back and just sit here and just very casually share together. So let me pray for us. God, you have said that you are the God of all comfort, and we are people desperately in need of comfort. We need to know that we've not been forgotten. We need to know that our loved ones were not abandoned or forgotten by you as well. This pain can take us to our knees and leave us feeling like the color in the world will never come back, that all the beauty is gone. Everything's ruined, everything's wrecked, that we are ruined and wrecked, that we don't know how to go forward, we don't know how to process it, we don't know how to do life without this person. But you have promised that you would never leave us or abandon us. And we ask that we could feel in just the smallest way that not aloneness today, even if it's just looking at each other, having a hug from someone real, having real arms around us, real tears mingled with ours that reminds us we're not alone. I ask that you would give us courage each day to get up again, to put one foot in front of the other, to slowly, over time, to begin to love again, to live again, to hope again. I thank you that you have promised that death is not the end. I'm glad that this life is not all there is. Jesus Christ, thank you for what you've done for us. May we be today encouragement to each other, support, care, love, comfort, tenderness. May we be friends and companions to each other. And I pray this in your name. Amen. So if you wouldn't mind just walking slowly out to the front entrance where you came in, and we'll participate in that together. Staff is here to talk to you all, pray with you, give you a hug, whatever you need.